Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, everyone. Good evening, my fellow Cornellians. It's my utmost honor to be up here to introduce my former professor from my MBA program, and also the moderator for the evening, Zach Shulman. To give you a bit of background first, before I introduce them, I finished my undergraduate studies at Cornell in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences in 2003, and the pleasure of taking business classes in a Dyson school. Back then it was called Army and AIM and all the different other names, and also at the Johnson School. So right now for the moderator, Zach Shulman. He's currently the acting director of entrepreneurship at Cornell, as well as a senior lecturer of entrepreneurship at the Cornell Johnson Graduate School of Management. He teaches courses of venture capital and law for high growth businesses, and courses on startups and venture capital. Since 2004, Zach has been a managing partner at Cayuga Venture Fund, a VC firm located in Ithaca, New York. He's currently serving on the boards of 6 of CVF's portfolio companies. Zach also serves on numerous advisory boards for groups affiliated with Cornell and the local community. He earned a Bachelor of Science from Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations in 1987, and also graduated from Cornell University's Law School in 1990, magna cum laude. So now to our featured guest for tonight. I first encountered Professor Steve Blank back in 2010 during my MBA studies. Along with the wonderful experience of attending Cornell, where I met my best and closest mates, taking Professor Blank's class was probably the greatest milestone in my education experience, and definitely one of my top life experiences. In addition to his class, I did an independent study where under his tutelage, I had the opportunity to interview nearly 30 entrepreneurs who had sold their startups to Google, and learn some great lessons of entrepreneurship and startup acquisition from Professor Blank through this process. He also gave me the opportunity to be his teaching assistant for his first class at Columbia University. Maybe I'll be the TA for his first class at Cornell, and he teaches at Cornell too.
The recruitment has begun.
He currently teaches entrepreneurship at UC Berkeley, Haas School of Business, Columbia University, Caltech, Stanford University Engineering School. And if you don't get an opportunity to take any of his classes, you can pick up either one of his 2 books over here. I brought them here today. Feel free to check it out later. 4 Steps to the Epiphany and the Startup's Owner's Manual. In addition, he has made his lectures available completely free via Udacity, a massive open online course platform. And his material are also available on his website, steveblank.com. You won't regret reviewing his materials. His many other accolades include the following. In 2009, he was awarded the Stanford University Undergraduate Teaching Award in the Department of Management Science and Engineering. In 2010, he was awarded the Earl F. Chait Outstanding Teaching Award at UC Berkeley Haas School of Business. In 2011, the National Science Foundation adopted his Lean Launchpad class as a US standard for commercializing basic and applied research via the Innovation Corps. In 2012, the Harvard Business Review listed Professor Blank as one of the Masters of Innovation, and he was a keynote at the National Governors Conference. Earlier this year, Forbes listed him as one of the 30 most influential people in tech. And in May 2013's Harvard Business Review's cover story was this article entitled, "Why the Lean Startup Changes Everything." In June, he won the 2013 Silicon Valley Visionary Forum Award, and the same month, his wife.
I'm going home. We can't get any better than this. We all have to leave now. Let's go out to the bar. Chris, enough. You've already gotten your grade, Chris.
What's probably most interesting for this crowd to know, though, is he's a native New Yorker. He was born and raised in Chelsea and the Lower East Side. And when he was born, his parents ran a grocery store in Chelsea. And he has an additional connection with us where he was accepted into another land-grant institution, SUNY Buffalo. He chose instead to go to Michigan State for pre-med studies. And like all of the great entrepreneurs of our time, he dropped out. He ended up going to repair fighter planes to Thailand during the Vietnam War. Fast forward a few years, 21 years later, 8 high-tech companies, 4 went public, retired in 1999 after Epiphany was founded, and essentially after 3 years, luckily he focused his attention on teaching. Since we're in an education setting, I want to make sure that the audience knows a broad introduction notes from Professor Blank's LinkedIn profile, his site steveblank.com, and also the May issue of Tablet Magazine where he did an in-depth Q&A. Without further ado, Professor Blank and Zach Shulman.
My wife doesn't know all this stuff.
It's being videoed, so you can play it for her. Okay, can you all hear in the back okay?
Yep.
So first, a couple of quick housekeeping. If you could turn your phones off or on silent. Bathrooms, there's a back door. Go down one floor if you need to go. We're going to run this pretty much while I'm asking questions, but if you really have this big urge to ask a question for the next half hour or so, raise your hand. I'll try to call on you. I can't promise, but you definitely have time to ask questions at the end. I tend to be a little more interactive, so I actually appreciate the questions. I just can't get too carried away with them. So I want to start this off by telling you that this is proof that cold calling actually works. So I don't know Steve. I met him for the first time this evening. I emailed Steve, I don't know, 2 months ago, and I said, Steve, we have this great conference coming up in New York City, the New York City Cornell Entrepreneurship Summit, which, by the way, if you haven't registered, you should. It's on October 11th here at the Times Center. And I wanted Steve to be a speaker at the conference, and unfortunately he couldn't make it. So he tried to give me a soft push-off, I think, like, oh, I'd love to come to the conference, but I won't be there at that time on the East Coast.
It's a form letter.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? I'll be in New York this week in August, probably thinking I would never follow up. So of course I did follow up, and I called Amanda and Mag, who Amanda works with. I said, hey, we got this great guy who's going to be in New York. We should have a CEN event. And they said, great. So I said, Steve, how about Tuesday? He said, great. So here he is. Here we go. So cold calling actually does work sometimes. I'm not going to say it's a great idea, but it certainly works. So during Chris's introduction, he mentioned that you started a bunch of companies. Could you give us a little more flavor of the types of companies and when it was and how successful?
Sure.
I mean, and these folks might not know you live on a ranch now and it's beautiful, and but what's the lead up to that?
Yeah, 21 years of hard work. So Chris mentioned I actually dropped out of school, which is a great career path for someone with attention deficit disorder. And then the U.S. military during a war is also a great career path for someone to get their life in order very quickly and get focused on back and having a career. So after I dropped out, I spent 4 years in the Air Force, 2 years in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, and actually learned electronics and very quickly learned I didn't want to be fixing bodies, I wanted to be fixing electronics. And through lots of interesting twists and turns, I ended up in Silicon Valley in 1978 when it was a boom time in the Valley. And though ironically my first company was a startup in a military intelligence, actually national intelligence, and much later on my boss became the Secretary of Defense, Bill Perry. And so the first, I guess now it could be said, our customers were the NSA, CIA, and NRO. And I got to see what the black world looked like. And the irony is, of course, I had roommates at the time, living in Palo Alto, who were working on these toy little things called microprocessors. And they'd be running around going, look, I made the speaker beep. And I was working with a room full of electronics that even today would be pretty unbelievable, but if I told you, I'd have to kill you. But they were running around going, oh, look, it can make a noise. And I'm going, it can make a noise. You wouldn't believe it. And I couldn't tell them. But the really interesting thing is, while I was doing more technically interesting stuff than maybe 300 other people in the world, they were masters of their own fate. They were starting companies, and I was a cog, an interesting cog, in a very interesting set of technologies. But after a while, I realized that I was never going to be master of my own fate in what were these national programs that had hundreds of thousands of people working on them, and spacecraft and aircraft and other companies. And these guys were starting things in our living room. And I pretty soon left the black world, which turns out it's kind of like the Hotel California. Once you check in, you almost never check out. But I decided that the world of startups was more interesting, and in fact, the world of microprocessors, which these guys were actually playing with. I didn't want to play with them. I actually wanted to design them. So I joined a microprocessor startup called Zilog, which was my first of 2 chip companies. And it started as the head of training and education, taught microprocessor design, and then because I could teach it and actually understood customers, I ended up being a product marketeer. And then my career essentially had a trajectory of marketing careers in a variety of technology startups, a workstation company, and second microprocessor startup called MIPS Computers, and supercomputer companies, and enterprise software companies, and video games. And the general career was marketing, to the extent that, while I wasn't a very good engineer, I would never admit to the engineers I knew anything about engineering, I was pretty good at understanding both the product in an architectural and technical sense, but I was always really interested in how to explain stuff to customers, and to do that you needed to understand customers. And so I was spending a ton of time getting out of the building, working with sales, working with customers, listening to customers, but also comfortable enough to sit down with engineers and either understand what they were building, or better, try to communicate what customer needs were. And
So the framework of the lean startup started way back then.
way back, because in Silicon Valley, typically a marketeer back then was either one or two cases. They taught engineers how to become marketeers, because no sane MBA would actually go to work for these crazy companies back in the 60s or 70s. And so most marketing people were self-taught, or they were Marcom people or product managers. And very rarely did you have somebody inside, it wasn't that rare, but it was fairly rare, that marketing really wasn't a profession of understanding technology. And so my career kind of prepared me for both technology-intense companies. I tended to like ones where the thing that drove me was I'm always intensely curious about learning new things. So if it was an area or an industry I knew nothing about, and if it was outnumbered and overwhelmed, those tend to be the startups I actually like to join, because why else do something that everybody else is doing? And also, as I found out later, and the payoff is usually larger if you're right. And the end score after 8 startups were 4 IPOs, but more importantly, 2 craters so deep that they left their own iridium layer. And a lot of the learning came from the failures, and then the successes. In fact, my next to last company, which was, of all things, a video game company, we were on the cover of Wired magazine. What a big deal. You're on the cover of Wired, high point of your life, and I was the CEO. 90 days later, I realized the company's going out of business. and then it did. And I called up my mother. Said, I was a Russian immigrant. English, still after 60 years, you could just hear the pause as the translator kicked in. And living here in New York, and I said, Mom, my company went out of business. And, oh, yeah, it's too bad, Truly, that's what she sounded like, except not in my voice. And then, is that okay? Are you all right? Yeah, Mom, I lost $35 million. And she said, oh, where'd you put it? I said, no, Mom, lost it, spent it. And then she broke into languages. Once she got past Russian and Polish, I didn't even know what they were. And we can't even change her name, it's already blank. And I was like, oh, the country we came from is no longer there. We can't even leave, and we're stuck here, and what are you going to do? And here was the point that I've never forgotten. I said, Mom, in Silicon Valley, failure just means you're experienced. And that's a big deal. It's a big deal not only in Silicon Valley, it's a big deal in New York as well. In that in entrepreneurial clusters, we do something that happens nowhere else in the world. That if it's an honest failure, you get multiple shots at the goal. And while it doesn't make you feel any less depressed and it doesn't make you feel happy, is that after you fail and you're kind of mentally recovered, you have a coffee with a friend, first thing they ask you is, so what's your next company?
Yeah.
And that's what makes this country great. And that's what makes entrepreneurial clusters like New York and Silicon Valley and others unique. And so
you forgot Ithaca.
Yeah, right.
Ithaca, no list.
And is that in the United States?
It is.
And so my last company, I learned all those lessons, and it was in the internet bubble, and it was a company called Epiphany. And the other punchline was of the people who lost money. In my next to last startup, I raised $12 million for them, and returned $1 billion each to the 2 VCs who gave it to me. And
right. So the 35 that you lost, it was VC money.
Oh, it's
Just
always
now,
VC money.
now, did you explain? Right. So your mom shouldn't have been that upset because it wasn't your money.
The last thing my mom ran was a grocery store. So this type of finance was not. Just an aside to tell you where I grew up in New York. I do have a ranch now, and I've made sure that the size of the bathroom and my wife's closet is the size of the apartment I grew up in New York, just so you never forget where you came from.
Nice.
And so, and of course my kids don't quite understand that, but
Maybe we can have our next Cornell Silicon Valley event at your house.
in fact, you could fit everybody here in the living room.
Where's Amanda?
Yeah.
Get on that.
So, but the point was, after 8 startups, growing up like I did, which was my parents were immigrants, and my kids were 7 and 8 years old, I learned a lot of lessons watching entrepreneurs I really admired, who gave everything they had to their jobs, and watched them, because we had kids late in life, watched them as their kids hated them as they got older. And I said I wasn't going to do that if we had kids, and if I ever had an opportunity to retire, I was going to do that. And when I took the money off the table, my kids were 7 and 8 years old, and said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but it isn't going to be this anymore, because at least the way I played entrepreneurship, it was 24/7, and I probably made some extra hours in the day, in leap years or something. And I wanted to have the rest of my life back and see my kids grow up and have them at least know who I was. And so I did that. And not knowing what I was going to do, I decided to write my memoirs. Well, that might seem funny, is that in hindsight it was a catharsis. I would write down what I learned, and I'd do lessons learned, and I'd started realizing that there was a pattern I had never seen before, even in my own business. By this time I was sitting on public boards, private boards, technical advisor, and I hadn't seen as many companies as venture capitalists, but had seen a bunch of stuff. And I realized that there was a pattern that I and others had never described before. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but
it's okay.
You asked me about...
This is great. I just asked a question that goes on for 15 minutes, but you're always
marketing
interested.
training, right?
So the thing that's interesting here is that, so you lost all that money. I'm a VC too, so we don't like it when companies lose money, but the same VCs backed you again because they liked you and they thought you could execute.
Yeah, they thought I was crazy, but that's typically...
But they thought you could
Yeah.
execute, right?
Oh, could I execute?
Right, and you did.
Yeah.
And you got them back their money
Yeah.
times whatever the number is.
Large.
Which is awesome. So congratulations on that. Let's switch back to another topic or point that Chris made. So you did drop out of college for reasons other than what Mark Zuckerberg probably dropped out of college for. I think he probably just was bored. What do you think about a college education? Like, so when a student comes to you, I'm sure they do a lot, and say, Professor Blank, should I finish my MBA program, or should I finish my undergrad program, or should I go pursue my startup? Is there a standard answer?
Sure. I'll just tell you the standard answer for finish my undergrad is I'll break your legs if you leave. It's just silly. You could pursue these things part-time and whatever. And I've only had one student who left actually as a freshman. But I think we've all seen enough students now to realize there are some students who actually college is too early too soon. And that's a different case, and that was simply my case. I wasn't old enough or mature enough, or I came out of a dysfunctional household, which, by the way, as an aside, how many of you are founders of a company? Okay, and you don't have to keep your hands up, but how many of you come from dysfunctional families? Okay? So it turns out that founders from dysfunctional families have an incredible competitive advantage, and it was the only advantage they've had in their entire lives. And the reason why is founders from dysfunctional family grew up trying to bring order out of chaos, and where plates were flying and other things were flying around the house, and it was, nothing was the same day to day. Welcome to a startup. No, seriously, for those of you who have never been through that family situation, congratulations. But you were at a disadvantage trying to run, because the rest of us who grew up in that, normal day, 6 people quitting, customers leaving, like the building's on fire. Hey, and everybody goes, how come you're not, wait, I grew up like this, what are you talking about? And it also explains, by the way, for some of you who work for those kinds of founders, why when things become repeatable and scalable, why they throw hand grenades into their own company. Founders who are dysfunctional should pay attention here.
Well, I was going to ask you, so did you actually scale with the companies, let's take Epiphany, where you actually remain CEO until the exit?
So
I could guess that you might get bored.
By about startup 6 or 7, I realized that while my ego wanted to be the CEO of 10,000 people, and that's every founder's dream, I realized what I actually wanted to do was own the largest piece at the liquidity event and hand the crap to someone else. And at Epiphany, we hired the COO of KPMG, who was great at managing crap. He was doing wonderful. Excuse me, you could filter that out online, but Roger Saboni was world class.
But you still say you still retain CEO?
No, oh God, no.
Okay.
So there are, in fact, this brings up a meta point, and it's one we'll talk about maybe a little later. The distinction between a startup, and startup founders who are responsible for searching for a repeatable and scalable business model, versus company executives who are responsible for execution of a known business model. That is, we've all kind of known that a Fortune 1000 CEO and a corporate and a startup founder are just different wiring, right? We could see them, but we never kind of understood, well, why are they different? What is it? I mean, we could kind of do descriptors, but we didn't understand the core distinction. And I got to tell you, we now know. The core distinction is founders are great at searching, meaning they're doing something on Monday, which is different than Tuesday, then Wednesday, then Thursday, and what they're searching for is a repeatable business model. That is, have we found a value proposition that matches customer segments, and have we figured out all the other pieces of our model? In an existing company, the CEO's job is the execution of that model. That is, policies, procedures, etc. And so we go from search to execution. Except there's a middle box, which is the secret memo that you're a VC, secret memo you never tell your founders. And that secret memo is we really don't go from search to execution. We go from search to build to execution. And you know what we do in that build stage?
Replace the CEO.
Of course, we fire the founder. Except you've never gotten that memo, because when they were trying to invest in your firm, you never said, oh, by the way, the day you find a repeatable model, you're putting our investment at risk because you're the crazy founder, right? So you bring in an operating exec. And so if you really think about it, the model really goes from search to build to execution, and their different stages require different skill sets.
Correct.
If we were really honest with founders, we in fact would explain that up front about, we're investing in you because you're actually good at discovering business models and whatever, but your skill set might not take you to the promised land. And therefore, we're going to give you a different deal.
Or it might take them to the promised land depending on their mindset.
You bet, and it might.
That's just the key.
And in fact, what I now teach founders is, you got a set of term sheets. What do you want to do? Oh, really? You want to grow with the company? Why don't you ask the VCs what percentage of their founders are there at the liquidity event? And you will get very different numbers depending on firms. So, for example, Andreessen Horowitz comes out of VCs who were ex-founders, and they tend to invest in very different people than Kleiner Perkins historically had the neutron bomb theory of investing, which was, the idea is great, and it's the founders that will replace because they had a cadre of operating execs they would drop in. Does that make sense?
It does.
Now, so understanding that execution, build, search process was also an interesting pattern for me.
So the whole key would be to know that you might get replaced, but still maintain that big ownership chunk when you actually leave.
Better to have a parachute. I have to tell you a funny epiphany story. Is me and my co-founder. My co-founder actually had been a VC at Hamburg and Quist, a great partner named Ben Wegbright, and Ben and I talked to each other, and we both agreed that if this thing worked well, we were going to bring in a CEO, and we just kind of did the math and said, and the VCs are going to probably want to toss us out, which was the Valley's way of dealing with founders, at least back in the late 90s. And I said, Ben, let's go figure out how they can't do that without vesting all our stock. And to make a long story short, hired a new CEO, and almost like clockwork, he comes in my office and says, your partner Ben needs to go. And I said, Roger, that's great. I'm sure Ben would love to vest all his stock, and that would be great. And but you got to go too. And Roger was just wonderful. He said, Steve, obviously the board and I looked through all the series documents, and you guys have no vesting rights. And I smiled. And I said, that's because you haven't read the state and corporation papers. And for those of you who know, it's never hidden there. Ben put our parachute in the state and corporation papers, and we had in fact sent them to the Kleiner Perkins lawyers who never bothered to look through the state and corporation papers. So thank you. I don't know how we got there, but
yeah, that's actually great.
That is a great story. And by the way,
it's never happened to me, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I will look.
It was a story that actually was worth several digits.
That's great. So let's go back to the question. How do you answer it for MBAs?
So when I have a couple things. When I have students who are asking, should I go get my MBA?
Just the mic.
Oh.
The mic. We're good. Keep
Okay.
going.
So when I ask students, or when students ask me, should I get my MBA? The question is, what do they want to do? And if the answer is, well, I don't know, but I want to get my MBA, I tell them, don't do that, regardless of school. And then if they tell me, well, I want to become an entrepreneur, next thing I tell them is, have you worked at a startup? It's like wanting to start a restaurant without having worked in one. Well, I've eaten in one. Well, that really doesn't count. It's like, like my friends work in startups. I go, well, why don't you spend a year in a startup before you decide? Because it will actually, it will guide you on what you want to learn when you're in business school. And then the other piece is, to be honest, there are a bunch of people who think they want an MBA, but they might actually want a management and technology degree, which is actually quite different. But MBA is kind of the cool thing to get. Yet they get disappointed when they're in. The other thing I get is the other way around. Is when my MBA students graduate. Almost every year, I get students who say the following: Professor Blank, we need some advice. Great. What kind of advice? Well, I got a job choice. I really need your help. Well, what's the choice? Well, I'm trying to figure out which one of these two to choose from. Okay, what's the first choice? I got this great offer from McKinsey. I go, McKinsey, great firm. How can you go wrong? What's your second choice? Well, me and my roommates are thinking about a startup. Well, I'm glad you guys are allowed because they're saying it with a straight face. And they're about to launch into the description of startup. I go, well, you've already decided. No. Would you like to hear about the startup? And I go, no. You're confused. McKinsey is a job. It's a great job. But a startup is a calling. It's a passion. It's something, if you want to be a founder, you wake up at 3 in the morning taking notes, or you're thinking about it in the shower in the morning. I mean, it's not some job, and you're obviously confusing these two as a job. Take McKinsey, and when you don't like it after a year and a half, then you'll be worrying about what startup you're doing. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question.
Sort of.
Okay.
Sort of. I mean,
I gave you the marketing answer.
I like the technology management piece because there's a lot of us in the room that actually teach at the business school. And, we have a new tech program down here, which Doug is going to describe in a little bit, which actually gets to that very point, which I think is fabulous. Let's switch gears for a second and go to more. I hope it's not a boring question, but a basic one. So eyeballs versus revenue. You must get a lot of companies, and a lot of students coming to you. How do you rationalize the eyeball companies versus the revenue companies? Do you guide students to one or the other?
No, I mean, even eyeball companies are a multi-sided market, meaning while you're getting users, there has to be some kind of payer. I mean, if you think about Google, one could argue that, well, how much do you and I pay for Google? It's free, but they're the most profitable company in the world. That's because not only are there users, there are payers. And what's really interesting is if you use a business model canvas, you could then see, the value proposition.
Well, why don't you describe what the canvas is?
Yeah, so let me, can I segue into the lean startup stuff?
Sure.
So one of the things I did when I retired is I did a lot of reading for the first time in a long time. And one of the books I read is Joseph Campbell, A Hero with 1,000 Faces. Anybody ever read that? It was like a 1950s sociologist. Campbell was somebody who noticed something interesting, a pattern that no one had ever noticed. And he read all the mythology from Greek and China and the Middle East and, all the ancient tales of the Iliad, the Bible, and he noticed that in almost every culture there was a story of the hero, a hero myth. And the hero myth was common. It worked like this. A hero was called to a quest, and the first thing the hero did was turn down the calling. And then something tragic happens. And so the hero, after the tragedy, says, all right, I'm going to go on the quest because whatever was keeping me here, just went away. And he puts together a set of companions. And they go on this quest, and there's a lot of trials, and either spiritual or physical. And then as they're nearing the quest, there's a death and a rebirth. And then they have some insight and some goal. Now, by the way, this is the story of the Iliad, Moses, and Luke Skywalker. right? Because
Don't forget Harry Potter.
Harry Potter,
Yeah.
right? And in fact, because all those guys stole it from, once Campbell figured it out, it became the standard screenwriting trope for the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The reason why I tell you this is that as I started reviewing what I had learned about startups, you have to understand that up to the 1990s, that every entrepreneur believed theirs was a singular journey. That everything you were doing, there was no commonality at all. It's hard to believe now. But you truly believe that the only thing that was common is you had to do an income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow, and so was everybody else, but there was nothing to learn from anybody else. Maybe your VC would toss you a nugget of wisdom, supposedly wrapped in gold at your board meeting, but that was about it. There was no internet to share this stuff. And it dawned on me that this was wrong. That actually there was a common path, and we were just mistaking how we were building startups. And so I'll save you the 10 or 15 years of insight, but there were 2 or 3 key pieces. One is startups were not smaller versions of large companies. Yet our venture capitalists and investors and business school were telling us that no, you want to build a startup, you do everything large companies do, the startups do, but smaller. They write business plans, you write business plans. They hire sales, marketing, and biz dev, you're going to do that on day one. Doing something wrong.
Go ahead. It's okay.
They're trying to put together 5-year plans. You put together 5-year plans. Everything that large companies were doing, we thought we did. And more importantly, when we failed, what did we do? We didn't make the numbers. Who's the first person you fired? VP of sales. And still not making the numbers? Can't be the new VP of sales. She's great. Let's fire the VP of marketing. And if that doesn't work, boom, founder's now, the chief strategy officer out of the company. What we never understood, that perhaps it wasn't the problem of the individual. Perhaps we ought to have fired the plan. It's a big idea. How we changed strategy up to the 1990s was we fired individuals, and the new individuals came in and said, well, that was a stupid strategy, let's come up with a new one. And so I realized that perhaps this wasn't the right path, that startups that were really succeeding were the ones that didn't execute per plan, but actually, as they executed, learned and listened to customers and changed what they were doing as they were actually building the product. And these iterations, and then what Eric Ries labeled as pivots, are actually fundamental to this idea called the lean startup. And so the lean startup is, startups are not smaller versions of large companies, and more importantly, what we needed were our own tools for founders, very different tools than what have been developed in business schools for the past 100 years. What we developed in business schools, starting at Harvard in 1908, was management tools for administration and execution. And if you really think about it, we were turning out cohorts and cadres of managers to administer existing corporations. Makes sense. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's how we built the American century. But we had no tools specifically oriented for early stage ventures. In fact, we didn't even have a language that said they need different tools. And so what we've evolved in the last decade or so is what's been labeled the lean startup. Has 3 components. One is business model design. We use Alexander Osterwalder's work. You should all have his book, Business Model Generation, on your desk. And Osterwalder says, look, instead of describing a corporation by its functional organization, sales, marketing, engineering, draw an org chart, why don't we describe its business model? All the components necessary to deliver value to customer and revenue profits to yourself. What's a business model? Well, Osterwalder, and again, academics will argue about it for the next 20 years, but has put it in one diagram. He says there's 9 boxes you need to worry about. What are you building? He calls it value proposition. Who are you building it for? Customer segments. What's the channel? How are you getting it to them? How do you keep and grow customers, customer relationships? What's the revenue streams? That is revenue model and pricing. Any partners, resources, activities, and costs. I make startups use yellow sticky notes, not a business plan, and put their hypotheses about each component of their business model on the wall. Why do they call them hypotheses? Well, at least at Stanford, the students are paying $50,000 a year. But outside of Stanford, they're called effing gases. And the problem is, we used to treat them like they were facts, right? We used to put them down in a business plan, and God forbid you were able to raise money for them, oh, then they became God's gift to execution. But I believe that all you have in the building on day one is big idea. Pay attention to this one. Is a series of untested hypotheses. There are no facts inside your building. So you need to get the heck outside. And that's the second piece, the piece I invented, which was called customer development, which says, let's take all these hypotheses. I'm glad you're the smartest engineer, or the smartest MBA, or the smartest domain expert, but the odds of you actually getting it all right because you sat in the business school library for an effing weekend, I don't think so. The facts are outside, and I want you to spend your time validating those hypotheses about your product, about your features, about whatever. And the third piece that we're going to do is, instead of building your product end to end, alpha test, beta test, first customer ship, big functional spec, etc., we're going to say there's no possible way you could know every feature customers want on day one. So instead of waterfall engineering, we're actually going to engineer the product radically different. We're going to use agile development. And we're going to build the product incrementally and iteratively, testing first a wireframe, then more features with customers. So by the time we're shipping, we already have a series of customers who've raised their hand and potentially have paid for the product. Think of it as almost like a giant Kickstarter, but integral to the process of developing a company. This process is called the lean startup.
And that product is your MVP, right?
So that the iterative versions of the products are called MVPs. Yeah. So at day one, it just might be a PowerPoint drawing that you're showing to a customer. Or for a physical product, it might be a clay model. For something else, it might just be a moving part of the heart pump instead of the whole heart. Kind of hard to take out and show. But and then as your product gets more sophisticated, it starts looking like the final product. These three components, business model design, customer development, agile engineering, make up the lean startup. The irony for business schools is, of course, when I started thinking about how to do this, I read all the literature on innovation that existed. And in fact, all the innovation literature was about how to do innovation in large corporations. And what did they basically talk about? They were either product management versions or how to make smaller versions of the next thing. So I basically abandoned reading corporate literature and wrote our own. And that's why the Harvard Business Review story was great irony, because what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years is that all the rules that used to work in large corporations are now obsolete. The whole General Electric is go for market share and be number 1 and 2. Try that, you're out of business in 10 years. Why? Because the cost of creating new markets around you have...
So what big companies now are the best at using those tools? Are there some? I mean, I'm guessing Google probably does still.
So, I'd say Google, Amazon, Apple. I mean, the people Tesla. I mean, Tesla's changing their product. Literally, as we speak, at the end of every quarter, they're shutting down the product, the manufacturing line, and doing agile engineering on the product for a week.
And did that come naturally to Mr. Musk? I mean, what's the...
So what I found out, just as an aside, I wish I knew it at the time, Elon's first job was an intern in the company that lost $35 million. It was called Rocket Science Games, and turned out he had the word rocket science as an intern on his resume for about 4 or 5 years. I had no idea until my ex-VP of engineering said, he worked for you. But I said, no. But it turns out...
I mean, does he know he worked for you?
I'm sure he does. It's kind of hard to miss when you worked for me. If you were still employed, it was even harder to miss. Sure, some people did this naturally without ever, right? I'm not inventing something people have never done, and it's not like that hard to imagine. What we've done is give names to the components.
You've kind of codified it.
Codified it in a way that's repeatable and scalable. In fact, I'll tell you the other piece that we codified. I could never even define what a startup was. somebody would ask me what a startup was, I'd say, well, it's band of brothers, you get free food, you get to bring your pets. I mean, like, well, what the hell is it? We lose money, sometimes we make money. I now have a definition of a startup that, boy, if you hear, you now know what to do when I'm done talking. To me, a startup is a temporary organization designed to search for repeatable and scalable business model. And if you parse that sentence, there's a lot of action there. First of all, startup's a temporary organization. That's hard to remember when you're eating all that free food. The goal of a startup is not to become a startup. Right? The goal of a startup is to become a large company. To search, well, that's a big word, because I thought a startup is supposed to code, or a startup is supposed to sell, or no, it's not. It's supposed to search for all those pieces that are repeatable and scalable. So now if you're the founding CEO and all this stuff is happening around you and want to remember what your job is to build a big company by figuring out who my customers are, what products. By the way, the first two pieces of the business model, value proposition and customer segments, have a special word called product market fit that we sometimes hear about. That's the job of the CEO, is to find that stuff. What's the right pricing? What's the right features? What's whatever. And so now we understand that our job is not to just fling some hardware or software out the door or get some orders or bluebirds from your board, but to find all the components that make up a company. What was your question?
I can't remember.
It's
It's okay. It's okay. Let's take a couple audience questions, if you have some. Who wants to break the ice?
I think they're stunned.
Go ahead, Dan.
You've talked a lot about it being difficult to work for you. Can you elaborate a little bit on what it is, why you say that, and what are some of those skills that are they synonymous with making you successful?
I think I made it harder than necessary, but I think all, I won't say great founders, because I'm not sure I was ever a great founder. I was pretty good, but I would not put myself in a class of great founders. Have this problem of they're always unhappy because they see something you don't. My eye was on the prize 3 to 4 years from now if I knew how I wanted the world to be, and everybody just wasn't moving fast enough, or I couldn't convince them that this is where we needed to go. And as a founder, I was always impatient and wanted the world to look like I see it. And it just reminded me, after I understood that about myself, that a bigger issue about teaching entrepreneurship, the mistake we make in almost every curriculum worldwide in teaching entrepreneurship is thinking we're teaching accounting. We're not. Or even engineering. We're not. The minute you decide to be an entrepreneur, a founding entrepreneur, you're an artist. And in fact, our curriculums ought to manage, or ought to map to what we do for artists, not what we do for engineers. And what I mean by that is what an artist sees is something you don't see at all. They hear things you don't hear, or they could feel things you don't. I mean, you and I would look at a blank canvas, but Van Gogh was singing Starry Night. Or Beethoven was already hearing the symphony. All he needed to do was write it down. Or Michelangelo, you didn't see that 12-foot block of marble. He was just removing the marble around the piano. And so a world-class founder has that same passion and vision. But the irony is, we know how to educate artists. We've been doing that for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You teach them theory, but for God's sake, you teach a ton of practice in school, and we're not embarrassed about it. But most business schools would say, practice? Oh, we're not going to be a trade school. We practice in business school? Oh gosh, we don't do that here. Well, that's bullshit. Because that's bullshit, then maybe entrepreneurship doesn't belong in a business school. But if you want to teach a real entrepreneurial curriculum, of course you need to teach theory, but for God's sake, it'd be like having surgeons say, well, on page 422, I think I know what to do. Let's crack that skull right now. I don't want to be that first person.
So this is why you reacted so positively when I told you that we're giving credit for the E-Lab.
Yes,
for our student business
absolutely.
accelerator. Yeah.
Because entrepreneurship, if you believe my model, is passion-driven artists. And I'm talking about founders. So you should think about founders as a different class than early employees. Early employees are the rest of the orchestra. Founders are the composers of the symphony. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Absolutely.
Right.
Who else? Yeah, over here.
You talk about the model. The model sounds as a product driven. How about the service side? Have you
Same
found
thing.
the same application?
Same application. Same. You now just need to test the service components. I mean, the value proposition, if in this case is service, great. Tell me who the customers are. Tell me that you've prototyped some of that. Tell me what it's actually a lot easier for services.
It's easier because you don't have to build something.
Yeah, or you have to, or sometimes harder that you have to simulate what I would offer as a service if I was a tax accountant or something else. But you could do that.
Yeah.
I've had plenty of people do that.
Good, so it works. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yep. Hi, my name's Nemo. You had mentioned like search, build, execute when you were kind of talking about the process
Yep.
they'll go through and kind of where the founder might get fired throughout
Yep.
the process. And you also kind of defined the startup as a temporary organization
Yep.
where they find this repeatable thing. I was kind of wondering, how do you know, or like what are some of the things that like you guys, for example, knew before they walked in that they were probably going to come out and move and get the CEO? How do you know when you found that repeatable area, or if you should continue to keep exploring and searching and such? Which is kind of interesting.
So how do you know when you found a repeatable and scalable model?
Yeah.
You've got orders and customers and revenue. And by repeatable and scalable model,
And profit.
and well,
Right.
you might decide. So, for example, and this is now back to answer your question about users or payers, is that you and your investors might decide, gee, we're going to have a business model that when we get 1 million people, that we'll worry about monetization later. Always makes me nervous. I hate those businesses, but they're investors who did just fine. Fred Wilson et al.
Yep.
So I want to put the little star on, not necessarily profit, but most of the time, repeatable and scalable means I have found something here. Repeatable and scalable means that the founders are no longer doing magic DAX, and you could scale a sales organization with data sheets and price lists and PowerPoints that are not changing weekly. Seriously. And the diagnostic I always do for startups, oh, we're in trouble. We have a marketing problem. Well, why is it a marketing problem? Well, the head of sales says it is. Think about that for a second. And then when you go to the head of sales, what's the problem? Well, marketing problem. Well, really, what's the problem? We're not making the numbers. Well, what are you doing? Well, we're trying to sell. It's not working. And the diagnostic I always do is, well, can I see the corporate pitch? And the head of sales, Silicon Valley, gives me the corporate pitch. Can I see the pitch the salesman in Boston's using? Because by the time I used to get called in, it was always the salesman. There was always a salesman in Boston. Well, they're using the corporate pitch. I said, no, they're not, and they never were. By the time you're in trouble, the local salesperson is starting to use their own presentation because the one they've gotten from corporate is not working. And when you see that one, and I always came up with an answer none of the VCs wanted to hear, and after a while they knew I could dial it in, which is, you got 12 salespeople. That's usually when I got the call. You need to get it back to 1 because you just got burn rate. What you really haven't found was product market fit. But instead, you actually executed per the plan, which said hire salespeople.
Scale.
Sorry about this.
That's okay. There's a person behind you, yeah.
Yes, so as a follow-up to that question, when do you think is an appropriate time to do the pivot? I mean, there can be revenue, there can be customers, there can be product fit.
So in a perfect world, you never want to pivot, you want to get it right.
Of course,
Right.
but
So-
what are the signs of requirements around the...
So a pivot, as my definition, is just simply a fancy term for a substantive change in one or more of the business model canvas components. Meaning, hey, I discovered that customer segment I thought were, men, in urban areas, 15 to 25. Turns out our customers are women in the Midwest, 35 to 50. No, that's a substantive change. Or I thought my pricing model was going to be freemium. And I discovered that freemium actually means free forever. And so I've just changed it to a subscription model. That's a substantive change. And iteration, my definition, is you discovered your pricing should be $9.99 rather than $4.99. Right? It was just a minor change. So the question is, when do you pivot? And typically, hopefully, you've pivoted before you've raised substantive funds. Meaning, this is why I teach these classes. And what I'm trying to do is get entrepreneurs to actually learn how to do this customer discovery process by themselves, and that you could actually do this inexpensively before you build large teams.
And the goal of that is that you own more at the exit.
Not only do you own
Otherwise,
more, is that what we found, it reduces infant mortality and changes the funding rate. I got to tell you a very funny experiment. So I think Chris mentioned this as an aside. So this class is not only taught in multiple places, it's on Udacity. I have 135,000 students on this MOOC, but the NSF adopted it, National Science Foundation, and I now teach 400 teams a year of the best scientists and engineers this country has. But for the last 2 years, it wasn't mandatory until last month. That is, you could either try to commercialize your science yourself or apply for this program. And I knew none of this, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds. It turns out that in the U.S., Congress passed a law about 30 years ago setting up what's called the SBIR program and then something called the STTR program. This is just a fancy word to say that all the research organizations in the U.S. have to contribute about 3% of their budget to any scientist who raises their hand and says, I want to commercialize my basic research. 3%. That doesn't sound like a lot. Our R&D budget is $150 billion. Take that math. And so with the National Science Foundation, they've been doing this for 30 years, and I finally get a phone call from somebody who says, thank God Congress isn't actually asking how well we're doing, because the numbers are horrifically bad. So we set up this program. I get a call last month that says, Steve, we decided it was unethical to continue having people not take the program. Well, why? Well, as you know, the SBIR grants are peer-reviewed. Okay. Well, the standard process was getting what they've been doing for the last 30 years. About 18% of them got approved. Well, yeah, so why are you calling me? Well, the people who went through the Innovation Corps are getting 60% approval rate, over 300%. And while that doesn't say how well they'll do as a company, it is peer-reviewed, not only science, but business readiness. And what we've figured out is that we've actually figured out how to eliminate a ton of infant mortality because of a very simply stupid observation. We were giving out cars without requiring driver's ed. I mean, period. That's what we were doing with our national budget. And so this fall, I'm going to teach the same class, but this time for life sciences, for therapeutics, diagnostics, devices, and digital health, because UCSF and the National Institute of Health are having me prototype the same process that hopefully the NIH will adopt in 2014. And ARPA-E has already adopted it, so my goal is to get all of U.S. science that we're interested in commercializing under a program like this that allows us, again, to not make more successful companies, but to reduce the inefficiency in commercializing science. And then my next target is working with the SBA to do that for the other 99%, because 50% of all non-governmental workers are in small businesses. And the same process, though without the fancy language, can work for that. And then we're doing it for corporations as well. What was your question?
That's awesome. That's great.
Other questions?
One more question, then we're going to
What's the best question?
Go ahead, Dan.
When I tell people about Lean Startup, a lot of founders or people looking to start businesses will say, yeah, that sounds great, but it's not for me.
Right.
It's for somebody else. It's for kids that don't know what they're doing. What do you respond to? What do you say when you hear that?
God bless you. Have a great time. We'll see you after your next failure. and I don't mean it as a pejorative. I mean, listen, we've been doing startups for 50 years without this process, so there's no requirement, there's no magic, and there's no, I make no claims that, if you do this, you're going to fail, but in fact, the people who tend to appreciate it are the ones who've spent a lot of time and money doing random drunken walks around the pole, and then come back and go, really, there was a process? Can I see that book? And seriously, for me personally, I wouldn't have come back until I screwed it up 4 or 5 times because I was so pig-headed. So I just tell you, this is not something you need to proselytize. It is something that people need to come to you, and when they're ready, they're ready. And by the way, if they succeed without it, like a lot of them have, is great. It's just what we have is a process that, again, if you really think of any computer science people in the room, this turns an NP-complete problem into one that's calculable. Right? By putting bounds around the process. That's all we're doing is putting bounds around things we kind of know to eliminate the 100 stupid things that startups and entrepreneurs tend to do. But it doesn't mean we're going to make them successful. It just means we kind of know now, after 50 years, what a path is. Gee, you should probably figure out, you should talk to some customers before you build a product. Or you should probably, not add every possible feature you could think about just because you thought about it and because you're the smartest person in the building. And this stuff kind of eliminates that, but there is no magic here. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you. This has been fabulous. I
Great.
think
Well,
we
thank
really
you.
owe you a debt of gratitude for coming. and we will schedule the next California event at the ranch.
That's a deal.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Stay in your seats.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just staying put real quick, we're going to do the quick program update for the Cornell NYC Tech MBA program. So if I could just have Doug join me up here, that would be great.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. This was a great introduction to this. I assume how many people know there is such a thing as Cornell Tech? First of all, I want to thank all of you, because without all of you, there would be no Cornell Tech. Probably Stanford Tech. But it turns out Stanford, I guess, dropped out of the process. And it is a fantastic opportunity. I think we all owe a great debt of gratitude to Mayor Bloomberg for vision, to Dean Dan Huttenlocher for vision of what the campus is. And this campus is really giving us a great opportunity, and this was really a great introduction to a curriculum and a campus and a vision of education that's different than what's there. And Bloomberg's vision was that the New York City tech ecosystem, all of your businesses and all of your organizations and the things you're working on need students who are trained in a different way. That the technical system in New York is not going to thrive without the right kind of educational background. So we have this gift that very few people in education get. As I say, I've never worked for an organization that has less than 5,000 employees, or been in business for less than 150 years, and has less than an infinite time horizon. But this is a brand new startup in education. But it's not just a startup, it's backed by Cornell. So we have this opportunity to do something new and different. There, as you probably know, there'll be 8 degrees on the campus. I'm here to talk about the MBA, but I'm happy to talk about any of them because I'm the Associate Dean for Johnson for New York. We're launching the New York City Tech MBA. I'm going to give you the pitch, and then I'll give you the ask at the end. But the vision is that there's been MBAs around since 1908, and that the MBA, every MBA program in the world is in a business school, it's in a business school building. And that creates a certain kind of curriculum, a certain kind of mix of people with certain kinds of aspirations that get trained in a certain way. And we're going to create an MBA that meets the needs of business. It is an MBA. This is not a master's in technology. It's not a master's in management. It's an MBA. But it's MBA on a technology campus where people will learn the fundamentals of business, but learn them in ways that are relevant to startups, that are relevant to the digital economy, that are integrated with a technical curriculum. And they sit right next door. Instead of a marketer sitting next to a finance person, sitting next to a consultant, it's an MBA sitting next to a computer scientist, sitting next to an electrical engineer. And that creates a very different environment, and we believe will create a very different MBA. And we're building a admissions process from scratch, a career development process from scratch, and a curriculum from scratch. And a couple of professors who are doing that are here, so I have to say thank you to them, partially because they're here looking at me, but partially because I do have to thank them. But Wes Syme is here from our M&O faculty, and Rhett Weiss, who's executive director of our Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute, who are currently teaching on the tech campus, because every student on the tech campus, the technical students all take business, the business students will all take tech. So it really will be integrated campus. Already, if you know, the first program that was started on the tech campus was the Masters of Computer Science. But all of those students are required to take 6 credits from Johnson in business to try to bring these things together. It's a technology commercialization campus. So we believe we're launching a very unique MBA for the digital economy that needs unique students and is only there because of the great Cornell network, entrepreneurial and otherwise, that helped Cornell to win this competition. But it's not going to be a success without your help. We really believe we need MBAs. We went out. Our process for starting this MBA was to go out. We went to Silicon Valley, we went to San Diego, we went to Seattle, we went around New York, we went up to Boston, and we asked technology companies, what do you need that you're not getting? And they all said we could use MBAs. I actually believe there's a market out there which if you want to talk about for people who do not believe at all they need MBAs, who actually really do need MBAs. but I'll talk about the people who were open to MBAs. And they say, I need people who understand business problems, but also understand possible technical solutions to those problems. So I can find people who know one of those two things, but not people who know both of those things. So this MBA is about creating people who have the proper background, who have the proper passion, and will join this program and have the abilities to be able to enter a curriculum that will produce people who have both of those qualities. So we have this daunting challenge now of creating the curriculum, but we also have a very daunting challenge that I very much hope that you'll help us with. And that is, we have to identify fantastic people who have never heard of Cornell Tech, a campus that just started, that a year ago had 4 employees and now has 40 employees. To not go to Stanford, to not go to Berkeley, to not go to MIT, or to not just stay in their next startup, but to come to our MBA program because it's really the right thing for them. It's not the right thing for everybody. The Cornell MBA, the Harvard MBA, the next startup is the right thing for some people, but this MBA will be the right thing for some people, and we have to identify them and tell them about it and encourage them to come to it. So that's really, I want to answer anybody's questions. I'll stay around. I'm very happy to talk about it. I was given 10 minutes. I'm happy to take 10 hours. But we really need your help. Do you know people who are in their 20s, have some experience, are ready to be MBAs, but are totally passionate about technology, totally passionate about the tech business, are risk takers, which not all MBAs are. All MBAs think they are, but not all MBAs are true risk takers and truly passionate about these things, who are really bright and would be absolutely fantastic candidates for this program. We also need lots of other things like projects and jobs for these people when they graduate. And we need a tremendous amount of help, which I hope many of you will provide. But the first thing, and I'm really thankful to Zach to give me this platform, so we have to get the word out about the program, and we have to get people to identify people who are the right kind of people for this program, because we will not get a second chance to launch this program. And I believe Cornell Tech is a fantastic educational opportunity in terms of a truly new educational venue, a new curriculum, a new campus in general. Will truly be a great asset for the tech ecosystem in New York, and will truly be a great asset for Cornell University. It's a chance for Cornell to do something, as somebody tells me, it's the greatest gift given to Cornell since Ezra Cornell. That may or may not be true, but it's certainly a hell of a statement. So I'm here to answer questions. I hope you guys are all excited. I do thank all the people who've helped us win, to get it started, and all these things. We're all very excited and working very hard to make this thing real. It's our startup. And I'll take a couple of questions, and then they'll yank me off. But I really do hope that you'll identify, if you know somebody who's 25, 26, 27 years old, and what I've described is the right thing for them, please encourage them to call me, call the office, go online, whatever. Question?
Yeah, so I can imagine one of the first questions is going to be, how much does it cost? Is there any aid? And also, for those of us who want to tell people about it, what's the best way to get information to them?
Go to the Cornell Tech website, where they can go to programs, and they'll see the MBA right there. So there's FAQs and descriptions and all those kinds of things, and people to contact. We haven't figured out the tuition. It'll be patterned on probably our one-year program in Ithaca, which is currently in the high 80s, but we have to figure out exactly what the tuition is. There will be aid. We are a private, nonprofit institution. We are a nonprofit institution. That doesn't mean we don't need revenues. It means revenues equal costs.
Why is it so expensive? 1 year?
Because we are a nonprofit, so it might surprise people, but that's how much it costs to deliver a program like this. And actually, it costs much more to deliver a program like this. We only have space. The space we have is free. We have huge donations to help us get started on Roosevelt Island. Despite a lot of subsidy, that's how much it costs to deliver an education like that. I would say it's a bargain. If you want to go to Stanford to get an MBA, it'll cost you well over $100,000. It'll take you a lot longer than a year. That's our cost structure. And that's all we're trying to do, is be able to deliver a great program. We're not going to do it if it's not a great program. If we don't have great faculty, great staff, great programming for students, great projects. I was really glad when Steve talked about what we call performance learning. There's going to be a tremendous amount of not only learning in the classroom, but going out and doing in the New York City tech ecosystem. But it's a lot of money. It's a huge issue in this society. So I don't question that at all. The cost of higher education, having two children, one in college, one in law school, I can attest to the cost of higher education.
Are you doing joint degrees, MBA, as well as the...
You can do an MBA, MEng in 2 years on the program, so that's doable.
Just today, the next few years, the timeline of the campus, just broadly stated, the 60-second view of what happens over the next few years, from construction to build out, and school is open during that time.
The computer science program started last January.
Right.
The second intake started today, and they'll start classes tomorrow. That's the Master's of Computer Science. Next fall, we'll have computer science, information science, MBA, and the Technion and Cornell Innovation Institute dual degree program in digital media. So the number of programs is going to explode next fall, fall of 14. In fall of 17, the Roosevelt Island campus, as most of you know, we're in the Google building in Chelsea currently, which is fantastic, and we'll be building the first 4 buildings of the campus over the next 4 years, and in August 2017, New York construction and real estate approvals and all these things that I know much more about than I did a year ago, not nearly enough, willing. We'll move to Roosevelt Island August 2017, and then the campus, the number of people will grow. We currently have about 8 faculty. By next year, probably about 15 faculty. Does that answer sort of the quick? Okay, well, one more, sorry.
Are there plans for supporting entrepreneurs after they get out of the tech campus? Like incubator space or other investment funds?
The question was, are there plans for entrepreneurs after they get out of the campus? I would say there's plans for entrepreneurs while they're in the campus, before they get out of the campus. So incubator space, faculty, interaction, corporate interaction. One of the first 4 buildings on the campus is going to be a corporate co-location building. How many students who come to the campus will start businesses while they're on campus versus go into startups and then start businesses later on? We're very curious about, but uncertain about. But we very much hope that the business students and the tech students will get together and with the faculty start startups that we hope we will be able to support.
I just wanted to add, we also expect a lot of students to go into large organizations and act as entrepreneurs in those organizations. So that's a perfectly acceptable job outcome.
This is not just for people who want to do startups. This is for people who are passionate about technology, passionate about the digital economy, passionate about how it is changing the economy, how it is changing business, and being part of that. Because we truly believe that digital technology is not just changing through startups. All businesses are being changed by it. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and make sure you have more time to network, but I know there's a few people that are dying to do some quick open mics. For those of you that don't know what an open mic is, it's just, I'm going to cut it to 15 seconds instead of the typical 30. Tell us your name and why you're here or what you have to offer. So just a quick example is, my name's Amanda Christofferson, and I would love to talk to anybody that has space that I could use for a venue for a future event. So I'll be finding Steve later. But if anybody else wants to go, just raise your hand and I can pass you the mic. And if nobody does want to go, then we'll just go straight into networking. So.
Hi, my name's Cher Park. I launched a startup 8 months ago. It's called Pop Rages. It's a crowdsourced, printed fashion apparel brand, and I bootstrapped it with $7K, and I have $70K in revenues, and I'm looking for investors, so I'll be collecting $25,000 checks over the next 90 days. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Greg. I am launching a company that's commercializing some software that was developed at Cornell, actually, to help corn growers use the appropriate amount of nitrogen fertilizer throughout the season, which will help the environment and their profitability. I'm also looking for investors.
Hi, my name is Michael So. I'm the co-founder and CEO of P&L Click. We are looking to build a financial platform that will satisfy the Dodd-Frank requirement in the law, and as well as building a platform that will be an iTunes for the financial data market. Thank you very much. We're looking for seed funding. Thank you.
My name is Matt. I'm the founder of a company called I Give More. We are kind of like Facebook for charitable giving. So we're looking for charities that want to use social media to raise money, or corporate giving clients that have employee giving programs or are giving to charities and want to engage with nonprofits around cross-marketing campaigns. Also, if you have a whole bunch of money and you're looking for a company to invest, you can talk to.
Hi, my name's Howlin. I'm a co-founder of a company called InnoVision. I'm commercializing a technology from Cornell. It's about a positioning technology which basically gives the sense of a machine of three-dimensional coordinates. So the machine doesn't just communicate with the other machine, but also it can detect the three-dimensional position of the sensor in the space. So I'm looking for seed funding, and we already have a customers, big corporate interested in our technology, and we are solving a problem that no other technology can solve at this time. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Sinclair Kay. I was in the ag school undergrad and have a Wharton MBA. Helped Cornell get tech in New York, but have recently started a farm-to-table local food company. And I'm looking for anyone who's interested in the local food movement or anyone who wants to support the local food movement in any way.
Hi, my name is Nima Lashon. I'm starting up a company around online education for professionals and really focusing on crowd sourcing information. I'm very new to this, so I'll be interested in just talking to anyone that's in the online education field and mentors in general. Nemo, right here.
Hi, my name is Allison Josephs, Architecture and Planning 87. I have a graphic design company, and we specialize in creating graphics, logo type design for startups, online graphic presence, and any kind of printed collateral materials to help kind of create a personality for your new startup.
On a similar note, Jackie Brady, ILR 08. I work for an HR company. We do outsourced HR, payroll, benefits. So when you guys hire that first person and realize you need to give them a check, maybe give them medical benefits, I'm definitely the person to call. We work with tons of startups in New York and throughout the country. So let me know.
So just do a couple more.
Hello, my name is Keith Giroux. I write the Capital Preservation Real Estate Report. Are you ready for the tsunami that will wash over the entire real estate landscape? That is my question.
Hi everyone, my name is David Gould. I'm going to be a senior at Cornell. I'm taking the fall semester off to travel to South America and Africa to interview entrepreneurs and write about the startup ecosystems. So if you'd like to be one of the sponsors of this project I'm working on, I'd love to speak with you, whether that's a hotel room or part of your flight, or just to have your name on the final product I'm putting out. Thank you.
Why do you look at me?
Last one.
Hi, my name is Tom Brown. I'm a lawyer, 94 from Cornell, and I help startups and entrepreneurs deal with problems that have with employees, VCs, or partners. So if you're running into any complications, please give me a call. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So, I'm sorry. I, again, want to be respectful of everyone's time. So just to summarize everything, we will be sending you guys a follow-up email tomorrow. We'll have a contact list with everyone's email in it. So if you didn't touch base with someone tonight, feel free to do that in the future. We do ask that you use that information with tact. Please no mass emails or spamming everyone that was here. Otherwise, we just can't provide it for you in the future. So look for that email. We'll also have a link to the presentation tonight so you can watch it again, take notes, whatever you want to do, and some more helpful links as well. So if there's anything somebody's looking to see in that, please let me know. I'll make sure it gets added. And again, just a huge thank you to Steve and Zach for doing the conversation tonight. It was amazing. So thank you. And I'll let you guys get back to networking. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. And I hope to see you all at the next CEN event. Have a good night. Hold on, let me get this before it gets stopped on. Hi.
I'm Beth from Cardozo. We have a great location in East West Village. We're starting a tech law startup, legal